I'm good.
Today I've got a bit of a bonus episode of Absolute Anthem for you guys. There's still some things to talk about in regards to Anthem that we're probably not going to get answers to when EA Play goes live this Saturday, which, as a reminder, that's happening at 9 a.m. PDT, 12 a.m. EST. If you're looking for a place to hang out that isn't going to have a chat just spammed with emojis and people saying the same thing over and over again, I'm going to be streaming as well as hosting all of EA Play, the Bethesda conference on Sunday, and the rest of E3 over on my Twitch channel. If you want to come hang out with us, you can find the link to my Twitch stream right down in the pinned comment section below. Today, though, we're going to talk difficulty in Anthem. Difficulty, challenge, these are things I've been thinking a lot about because, well, they're very important to me. I like a game that offers a decent challenge. I think we all do at the end of the day. And unfortunately, a lot of big AAA publishers have been influencing the difficulty and the challenge that we see in a lot of our AAA video games. I do believe over the last several years there's been an obsession with chasing accessibility for an audience that really isn't there. Games being brought down to a level of simplicity to appeal to an audience that doesn't actually exist. And I'm really hoping that Anthem doesn't fall into that same trap. It's a trap that I very much felt Bungie felt into with Destiny 2's vanilla experience. It's gotten far better with Warmind. In fact, Warmind has brought back a lot of the difficulty, a lot of the variation with the inclusion of modifiers and heroics, and just overall the difficulty of Destiny 2 feels a bit better these days. But vanilla was an absolute disaster, and it wasn't just about enemies that were easy to kill, it was about enemies that weren't at all trying to kill you, a lack of actual AI that felt reactive to the player and their existence in the game world. There's a lot of different ways and angles at which we can approach the discussion on difficulty and challenge. Now, in a shared world shooter experience like Anthem, I think a lot of us expect sort of endgame type activities. Perhaps going into those shifter storms will be one of those. We'll go beyond the veil and find something waiting for us, some sort of a higher level challenge. Endgame activities, of course, are where we generally hope to find the more challenging aspects of the game and also the more rewarding aspects of the game when it comes to loot. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the game should just offer a bunch of humdrum cannon fodder for us to waltz our way through. But we do want moments in the game where we can activate a power fantasy and feel like we are a badass freelancer wielding our javelin with the most might. We still want those engagements as well as the more difficult engagements where we get put in our place to feel as if they require us to activate an element of skill, to have an understanding for the game and its mechanics and its enemies, to overcome them regardless of their raw power and difficulty. That's where nuanced AI, variety, and diversity in the enemies are going to come into play. And honestly, if I had to pick one area in which I really think challenge and difficulty is important in the way it's crafted, it comes down to how the AI performs, and again, the variety of AI encounters that we get within one specific encounter. This is actually something that Bungie's done relatively well with Destiny, enemy variety anyway, but they've done spectacularly well with Halo in the past. Halo excelled as a game on all difficulties because it never just threw one enemy type at you. We had multiple types of grunts, we had multiple types of jackals, we had multiple types of brutes and elites. The game was always mixing and matching, turning each and every firefight into a bit of a game of chess, if you will. You had to make the right move, you had to kill the right target at the right time, and you constantly had to consider what equipment you were going to save or utilize to engage and eliminate a certain enemy. For example, you might pick up that big juicy sniper rifle knowing that at the end of that fight, 2 hunters are going to show up. So while that sniper might have been great for clearing out those jackals up on the ridge, you decide to switch to a different weapon, saving the sniper so you can land those pinpoint precision shots on those juicy, squishy orange spots to take those hunters down a little bit more quickly. That is exactly the type of thing that I hope to see in Anthem. We get a small glimpse of the scars in the E3 2017 trailer, and they appear to be mixed. There's some variation to the engagement there, but that engagement as a whole comes across as more of a demonstration. It's nice to see the scars actually having some sort of a mechanical walker and our characters using some of their more powerful javelin gear to eliminate it, but the rest of the fight is more of a focus on what fodder could look like. And again, fodder is important. You know, you want weaker enemies that could potentially overwhelm you in large numbers, but that could be eliminated to give you that sense of power, that power fantasy, if you will. That's kind of how the grunts functioned in Halo throughout the years. They could definitely swarm you, especially when they decided to go all kamikaze with those 2 sticky grenades, but for the most part, they were headshot and melee fodder, and it was fun to hear them run and scream and call you a demon and die by the thousands. I'm okay with enemy types like that. We need strong and weak enemy types, but if they're all built on a reasonable level of intelligence, it doesn't even really matter how weak they are because they'll still at least feel organic. This is something that Fear did really well. Monolith created some of the best AI in a first-person shooter ever, and Fear feels incredibly alive because of it. Its enemies feel unbelievably reactive to the player and the decisions the player makes in its attempt to eliminate said enemies. They jump through windows, they bop off ledges, they try and flank you and outplay you. It sounds like I'm explaining nothing here, but games have really, I feel, gone away from the route of actually creating AI that tries to outplay the player and instead given us enemies that have insane health bars or enemies that don't even have that, and all of which that just stand behind cover like you're again in a shooting gallery. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. You can have the best gunplay, the best core combat systems, the best mobility systems, and all of those things are going to be really important for the core loop of Anthem to be really satisfying and replayable, but I don't care how many guys I have to headshot in the face, or how many times I have to find the crit spot on that one enemy, or how many times I have to break down that enemy's shield, if they all defend themselves by just standing behind the same piece of cover, not moving, stagnant, and really, in a sense, unaware of my actual existence and attempts to eliminate them. Reactive enemies are so important to me. Enemies that feel like they are constantly considering what the player is doing and how they could overwhelm the player. If a game world is going to be believable beyond its visual representation, beyond its audio design, we need the inhabitants, both friendly and enemy in this case, to function and exist like they would in a real world. They need to acknowledge the player as a threat and find the best way to eliminate that threat based on their abilities and their resources. That's what's really going to set apart the different enemies within Anthem, and that is what could potentially really set Anthem apart from other shared world shooters. It's not to say that like Warframe and Destiny and The Division and Borderlands, if you want to throw that in there, haven't done enemies well. I think they've all done some things better and some things worse than others. But honestly, none of them for me have really driven home the complete package. I think Warframe focuses more on fodder enemies early game and then eventually wraps up to give us more difficult enemies. Some of the boss fights have nice mechanics. I think Destiny excels in the realm of variety and giving us very satisfying gunplay, but it struggles to create enemies that feel interesting or enemies that feel like they're actually trying to outplay and outmaneuver the player. It happens sometimes, but not as often as I wish it would. In the case of The Division, we've got a great selection of difficulty options, the ability to actually change the scale difficulty of the open world, so content outside of endgame content can still be challenging. But even with the variety of enemies, melee, ranged, grenade enemies, heavy enemies, the AI never really feels like it tries to overwhelm you. As long as you're geared well enough and you keep falling back, you can kite just about everything in The Division, in the open world at least, and, pretty much tear them down over time. I want to see really a combination of all of these things blended together to give us some exceptional combat and exceptional gameplay inside of Anthem. It's definitely asking a lot, and this might be one area in which my hopes are probably higher than the end result will ever be, but BioWare has a lot of experience with building single-player games that function on multiple difficulty levels, so I'm hopeful that they'll take the skills they've developed in their time building Mass Effect over the years and ask themselves how they can really deliver on that experience inside of Anthem and give us, the best of both worlds, the challenge that came from harder difficulties, but the accessibility that comes from the easier difficulties. Obviously, we don't want a game where you just get stomped on, but we also don't want a game that makes us feel like we don't have to think, and that's really where I think AI intelligence comes into play here. The enemies don't have to be super deadly and lethal. This doesn't have to be Dark Souls hard. It doesn't have to deliver enemies with, 1000 HP health bars if they're constantly trying to outplay us and outthink us, if these enemies feel alive. That can make even easier enemies feel interesting and exciting to engage time and time again. Now, as I mentioned earlier with Destiny and its enemy variety as well as its game feel, there is another layer in which difficulty, in which challenge and skill required gameplay can be added to the Anthem experience, and that really is how BioWare ends up handling their gunplay, the combat as it's focused around the javelins, the idea of enemies that do die more quickly when you shoot them in the head, but going beyond that, enemies that potentially are invulnerable or impervious to headshots, enemies that carry certain shields or tools to actually take down or maybe even lock out certain abilities within our javelin systems. I really hope to see enemies, especially when we do talk about the harder content, the dungeons and the raids and whatever activities, the shifter storms in this case, when we go to those other worlds, as the BioWare team has been putting it over on Twitter, I hope those are areas in which we really do see the enemies throw even more curveballs at us. It was one of my favorite things about the House of Wolves expansion and Prison of Elders. Bungie found a lot of ways to force us to consider how we use our abilities, how we become comfortable with playing our Guardians in an environment where we would then be asked to do all of that while dealing with additional threats and additional circumstances. I'd like to see that variety in how the enemies engages, again, how they sort of throw combat loops and additional hurdles at us to make sure that the game always feels fresh. This sort of thing is just really important in a replayable experience. A game that you're potentially going to play hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, repeating content, because it's going to happen. They can't make enough content for 500 hours. You're going to replay content, right? So getting that game feel, getting that combat, getting that difficulty right is so important to ensuring that the game is satisfying. This is an area for me where Destiny has excelled. For all the problems the game has, that core combat feels really, really good. And when the difficulty is on point and you have a great modifier, you're in a heroic, the game can feel really satisfying. It feels like something you could play for hundreds of hours. So here's to hoping that Anthem can nail that sweet spot. I don't really expect to see anything on difficulty at EA Play. We'll probably be able to surmise some things from the gameplay and from the trailers, the footage that we see, but this is probably something that's going to be constantly tweaked and refined and changed over time. Let me know what you guys think. I really want to hear your thoughts and opinions on difficulty and challenge in a shared world shooter. What do you look for in these sorts of games? What's important to you when it comes to how the game challenges you versus how the game introduces you and how the game still remains accessible for lesser skilled players? Again, I think as a whole, a lot of the games we've seen recently are appealing to a crowd that doesn't exist. I think anyone looking to play a game like this generally has the capabilities to deal with reasonable difficulty, and I think some games in terms of difficulty and AI performance have been nerfed to a point where they simply don't need to exist. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I know I asked some of you guys over on the community page, and once again, if you want to join me over on Twitch this weekend and the rest of the week for EA Play and E3, all that information is located right down in the pinned comment below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
You have been brought here for a purpose, the most important task of your lives.